Mystery surrounds the health of Libya's powerful militia leader, Khalifa Haftar. With the renegade general likely out of the picture, who will fill the power vacuum? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Libya after Haftar. By almost all accounts, Libya's militia commander in the east is in a coma, potentially throwing the war-torn country into further chaos. Without Haftar, Libya loses a major contender in its presidential election, which was shaping up as a contest between Haftar and the prime minister of the UN-backed government in Tripoli. It also means the self-declared Libyan National Army is without its leader, and that could ignite a number of powder kegs. First, within the powerful militia itself, and then among the region's tribal fighters. Already, a car bomb has targeted Haftar's chief of staff in an apparent attempt to further destabilize his armed forces. So, who will emerge as Haftar's successor? And will Haftar's international backers step in? Natalie Pahonen reports.
This is General Khalifa Haftar's territory in Libya's east. But while he's receiving medical treatment in Paris, the situation on the ground is shifting. This convoy was carrying one of Haftar's senior commanders in the self-proclaimed Libyan National Army. He survived the car bombing last week, but one person died. Haftar has been a dominant figure both militarily and politically in a divided Libya. He was a former ally of Muammar Gaddafi, but since the dictator's fall, the general has emerged as a key power broker with regional influence. He backs the parliament established in eastern Libya. It has the support of Egypt, the United Arab Emirates and Russia. In the west, Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj leads the rival UN-supported Government of National Accord. The two men have rarely seen eye to eye, but they did meet in France last year for peace talks brokered by French President Emmanuel Macron. Haftar and Sarraj agreed then to try to hold elections as soon as possible. Both men have indicated their willingness to run for office and lead a more united nation. Saif al-Islam, Gaddafi's son, has also signalled interest in running for president. The UN says elections need to happen to untangle the political deadlock. Libyans have been offered the promise of unity before. But the country remains carved up between different interest groups, political factions and militias with no clear leader, and that's driven insecurity and economic uncertainty. Haftar has no clear successor to take over the command of the Libyan National Army. Now, with questions surrounding his health, will his absence create further chaos for Libya? Natalie Pahonen, The Newsmakers.
Now let's go to our panel. In London, we have Juma Al-Gamati. He's the head of the Tahrir Party and a member of the UN-backed Libyan Political Dialogue Group. In Tripoli, Mustafa Fetouri. He's a Libyan academic and journalist. And in San Antonio, Texas, we have Libyan specialist Mansour El-Kekhia. Mansour, let me begin with you. We don't know a lot about Haftar's illness. We've heard that he had a stroke. We heard that he had lung cancer that spread to the brain. One source said he suffered irreversible brain damage. We know he's not dead. That was the initial rumor. He's not dead. He's 75 years old. Can we, at this point in time, given all the available information, Mansour, say that this guy is definitely out of the running in terms of leadership for the foreseeable future?
I don't think out of the running is... Well, personally, he's out of the running, but his influence is still there. I have no doubt that there are some people within the National Libyan Army who support him and who support his vision. Now, how effective they will be is a different story. But will Haftar still have influence until he's totally buried, you know? And even when he's buried, he will still have some influence, indirect influence in the affair. There's no doubt about that.
Okay.
You know.
Okay, interesting. Juma Al-Gamati, do you believe that this is a game changer, given that Haftar, the man who was seen as the strong man, who might even be the next Gaddafi, according to some, might be completely out of the equation because he's severely ill and he might even die soon?
Well, I believe, irrespective whether he's dead or he's going to die soon, that is not our. That's not my concern. We talk about Haftar in his capacity as the head of the self-proclaimed Libyan National Army, as a man who has been very influential in the Libyan scene over the last 4 years, as a man who has been very, very divisive, with some people are fanatically supporting him, and some people are, fanatically opposing him because they fear that he might return us to military rule, to dictatorship, and to totalitarianism. So in that sense, I think his influence, his control is waning very quickly, is reducing very quickly. He might be already incapacitated. His health will not allow him to resume his normal functions and his normal duties. We know that there is a lot of competition now about who's going to be replacing him, and we hear about news of maybe promoting other officers. So in that sense, and because of his control and influence and hegemony over the parliament in Tobruk, in that sense, maybe the parliament now will be, his control will be loosened a lot, so that the parliament can be freer to make serious dialogue with the other side and the serious compromises from all sides to get us out of this mess.
Mustafa, let me ask you then, what happens to the LNA? There's a bunch of names that have been floating around. I personally don't know any of them. There's a Speaker of the House of Representatives in Tobruk, Aqil al-Saleh. There's Aoun al-Furjani, Abdul Salam al-Hassi, Abdul Razak al-Nathuri, a whole bunch of names that have been thrown forward as possible successors. What is the LNA going to do now?
Well, it's a pretty difficult question. I mean, given the general environment of systematic chaos, if you like, in the country, in Eastern Libya or Western Libya, I think the question of succession after Mr. Haftar, whether he is alive or dead, I mean, it's time that we talk about a person who is decapacitated beyond the ability of resuming his duties. So it's a quite difficult question. I am not sure if Mr. Haftar has any mechanisms in place, neither the parliament as well in this regard, whether they have any mechanisms actually in place to select a figurehead, if you like, for the LNA after Mr. Haftar. And because what really makes it difficult at this stage is the fact that two things. One is the chaotic situation and the balance of the parliament itself, plus the fact that the LNA, the whole idea of the LNA was created by Haftar himself in 2014, when nobody actually took him seriously. But it's a very difficult question to answer now. I don't see really a very good figure that could replace him right away, who could be a kind of generally accepted by the different forces in Eastern and Western
undoubtedly
Libya
had
as
a
well.
certain, he had undoubtedly had a certain strength and charisma. Even if you opposed him, he's not well at the moment. Mansour, let me ask you then, one of the names that I had mentioned, Abdul Razak or Abdul Razak Nathuri, the military chief of staff.
Abdul Razak Nathuri.
Yes, Abdul Razak, yes. So, Mansour, that man, he had an assassination attempt just recently. How much of an indication is that the East especially will plunge into further turmoil now as this vacuum looms over the East with Haftar incapacitated?
Well, in terrorism and the assassination attempts at individuals in the East has been going on for quite a number of years, and so that's not too different and too strange. And there are interests, of course, who want to plunge the East in turmoil. But the truth is, irrespective of whether it's a fiction or fabrication of Haftar's mind or not, the East has a unified command. It does not have militias. It has been relative peace for the last 2 or 3 years. So Haftar has been a positive force in, at least in eastern Libya. Eastern Libya does not have militias. We don't have kidnapping every day. We don't have any of this. And so are there people vying for Haftar's militias? Of course they are. Everyone vies for power. Is the parliament strong? Do that has aspirations? Yes, it does. I'm not saying no. But I think there is at least the silver lining in all of this is that you have at least one structure in the east that you have to deal with. And I think Naduri might be a viable candidate in all of this, but it will be undoubtedly within the military structure. It will not be outside it. Naduri has as much right to lead it as any other person within the military structure that exists today.
Right. Juma, let me pick up on one of the points that was made by Mansour, that Haftar has been a positive influence on the east. I think you disagree. Tell me why.
First of all, I can assure you that Haftar does not a unified, homogeneous, professional army. It is a collection of different things. Yes, there are professional soldiers and officers, but there are also tribal militias as part of the LNA and the Haftar camp. There are also Salafi militias as part of the Haftar camp. Only yesterday in Benghazi, in Venetia Street, they have been fighting between two groups. One group was supposed to be representing the police and another group representing some sort of an army brigade. And today, Huwaidi, who's in charge of security in Benghazi, has resigned. It shows you how fragile and that this collection of not homogeneous at all, so-called LNA, which Haftar has created around himself, his personality and his cult. Once Haftar is out of the scene, this might very well fragment very quickly. That is not good for the east of Libya. It's not good for Libya at all. That is why the HOR, the parliament, and Aguila Saleh and the current political leadership must take the initiative and ensure that there is stability within the LNA,
right,
and also push forward strongly with the unification of the Libyan army as a whole. The negotiations that were going on in Egypt between officers in the western Tripoli and officers from the east, led by Naduri and led by Abdurrahman Tawil from Tripoli, that negotiation should be resumed as soon as possible, preferably within Libya. Unite the army, because I can assure you the Haftar camp is not a professional army as has been presented.
Okay, so Mansour, they're not a professional army. They don't have homogeneous control. And this law and order that you're talking about in the east, Mansour, doesn't exist.
Well, I think I disagree with Juma. I know Juma. I know his thinking, and I know him for a long time. But I totally disagree with him. Juma follows and fundamentally goes with the Islamic Brotherhood, and he supports them. And he's been in the previous parliament before this one. He was a member of that, and I think he has all the rights to his thinking. But one of the points he added was the fact that these so-called, he calls militias, that within Haftar's structure. Well, that's important. Okay, that's fine. But when you look at the West, they're under no structure. Nothing's going to be easy. Libya itself is under difficult circumstances. The previous governments have made Libya under previous circumstances, taking over from Gaddafi. That Libya is going to find difficulty, at least between even unification between the East and the West is going to be very, very difficult. I understand all this, but what do they want? I mean, you want everything to be wonderful and hunky-dory.
Right. Let's ask Juma. Juma.
Let me just correct Mansour first of all about factual things. I was never a member of the GNC. I never stood for any elections in Libya at all. So he's totally incorrect there, and he should be following things much closely than that. I know he's in Texas, is a bit far from Libya. And secondly, I have nothing to do with the Muslim Brotherhood whatsoever. So just to put the record straight for the viewers, not for Mansour. Maybe he's not really interested to know the reality of things. But I remind him that there are militias in Benghazi. The Salafis are militias. tribal militias, what we call in Arabic kataib awliya ad-dam, those who are going to take revenge for their sons because they were killed by the other side. They have formed militias in Benghazi. They have ransacked many houses and many districts. These are realities which the Libyans inside Libya and in Benghazi and in the east know very well. Mansour from Texas cannot change that reality.
Okay. Now, I want to move on to talk about elections. But before we talk about elections, Mustafa, I want you to listen to what Ghassan Salami had to say, the UN Special Representative to Libya. Have a little listen first.
Elections are extremely vital in a country that needs to untangle political deadlock. It's specifically very important in Libya because most of the current institutions need more legitimacy. Legitimacy is not achieved through a decision, and it doesn't come through an international representative. Legitimacy comes by popular representation and the people's will by means of election.
Mustafa, it seems as if the UN is extra keen on elections. They want it as soon as next month. They're pushing for it. Is that a good idea?
Well, they have to be extra keen, sir, because for the simple reason they have no other alternative. The UN have failed Libya from the start, and whether this is a good idea at this time, I'm not sure really it is a good idea. And in terms of success, if we have a scale from 1 to 10, whether the elections will be successful or not, at this time I would only give it a 3, plus probably 3.5. on the scale to 10. And there are many reasons for that. I mean, the first and most important reason is that the whole country is not controlled by one single authority, if you like, whereby you could discuss with them and they can take control of the election day itself, the security issues.
So let me ask Mansour.
It's quite complicated.
Right. It is complicated. Mansour, given that Haftar is out of the picture politically in a tangible sense for the moment, will those elections even happen? Or should they happen with him out of the picture, given that he was one of the two main figures in the country in the build-up to a possible election?
Well, the truth is, if the elections do happen, they will fail miserably very, very soon after that. I don't see how can you build elections or have elections based on a structure that is not there. I mean, right now, when you think about it, you have a divided country on the one hand and subdivided countries in itself. And so I think, yes, you can never have elections, but how are you going to guarantee security for voting? How are you going to, what structure? There is no unified structure to do that. Will the UN come in? Will the United States or France or Italy? I don't know. I don't know how it's going to work out, you know. The truth is, at this stage, I think Libya as a whole is facing difficulty because of Haftar is incapacitated. Had he been there, you might be able to have elections. But since he's not there, you won't.
So
any
Jamal Gamati, let's ask Jamal.
Not going to be a bona fide one.
Haftar's out of the equation. That's why you shouldn't be having elections. Do you agree with that?
No, not at all. Elections are right for the Libyan people, but the question is which elections and based on what? There are two options being considered at the moment. Either we go for elections without a permanent constitution, without a referendum first on the draft constitution which is ready, which means that we will go to a 4th transitional period, which is more of the same, really. That's not going to help. Whereas the other option, which a lot of people are asking for, and if you are following Libyan public opinion and on the social media, a lot of people are saying we want constitution first. So that means let's go to a referendum on the draft constitution. If it is approved by 2/3 majority, then we have the new political order, the new political frame, the new constitutional basis for which will stipulate what kind of elections we will have, presidential, parliamentarian, what are the conditions, and that might come maybe next year. I think it's too ambitious to have it this year. I think the security conditions have to be right, the economic conditions have to be right, and we need to achieve a much better and higher level of national reconciliation. That's why Ghassan Salam has been advised that by all means, concentrate on national reconciliation between the East and the West and the South. And now, as a divisive figure of Haftar is out of the scene, national reconciliation will be much easier between those tribal leaders in the East and the West and the South. And then after that, let's have a constitutional track where we have a new permanent constitution, and that will show us and stipulate what elections we will have, and elections will follow after the constitution. That is really the logical sequence which I hope will be adopted and followed, and which I hope Ghassan Salama will also listen to and follow, rather than listen to regional and some Arab influences who want a quick election because they want some sort of a candidate to be there as a president to serve their own interest. What's important is not the interest of Egypt or the Emiratis or the Qataris or anybody else. What's important is the interest of Libya and Libyans only. And the utmost interest is for Libya, and that's what Ghassan Salama and all of us should be working for.
Okay, well, we'll be watching this closely. Haftar has severe health problems. It's complicated and already complicated situation in Libya. One thing I was going to ask you, gentlemen, but we're out of time, is, the UAE, Egypt, France and Russia have backed Haftar in the past. I wonder if they're considering, backing a new horse, or they're recalibrating their approach. So that's something to look out for as well. But for the moment, I have to thank you all, Jumal Al-Ghabati, Mustafa Fetouri and Mansour Al-Kakhia. I thank you all for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Still to come on the program, why one police union says gangs are taking over the Netherlands drug scene. And why Pakistan's human rights record is being questioned after a spike in disappearances. For decades, Amsterdam has been Europe's sin city, a place where millions of tourists can flock to smoke weed and solicit prostitutes. But some Dutch police say the liberal policies that make drug use legal is coming at a deadly cost. A report from the Dutch Police Association says cartels are taking over drug production, and that despite a drop in crime, the Netherlands is being turned into a narco state. Simon McGregor Wood went to Amsterdam to investigate.
The Dutch call it gedoogblad. It's their word for tolerance on soft drugs. And nowhere is it more clear than in Amsterdam. It's become part of the city's identity. Here, licensed coffee shops can sell small amounts of cannabis to people over 18. They can smoke it in the shop or at home. For many, the policy is progressive, a partial decriminalising of soft drugs, and it's been very good for tourism. But Dutch law contains a big contradiction. While it may well be legal to sell things like cannabis and hashish in so-called coffee shops, it's still illegal to grow it and produce it in the first place. So you may run a legitimate business selling, but you have to break the law to buy your product. And that's where the criminals step in. According to the Dutch Police Union, it's run by criminal gangs who grow more powerful every day. It's the dark side of the Dutch drug story. In a recent report, the police union said, "The Netherlands fulfills many characteristics of a narco state. Detectives see a parallel economy emerge. Criminals develop into wealthy entrepreneurs who establish themselves in the hospitality industry, housing market, middle class and travel agencies." The epicenter of this parallel economy is in the south. Away from the big city, away from the police, it's where the drug criminals produce cannabis in farm sheds like this one, recently busted by the police. Hendrik Brand runs a coffee shop in the city of Breda. Here you can buy 5-gram bags of marijuana or hash for €10. The atmosphere is predictably relaxed. It's busy. But Hendrik thinks the system is broken. Keeping production illegal just encourages the criminal, he says.
We don't allow people younger than 18 years here. But the street dealers and the house dealers, they don't care. They sell to 16-year-olds, they sell to 12-year-olds. Money is money for them. They don't pay taxes, we pay taxes.
While we were in Breda, another drug-related crime. A man shot dead in this apartment. Killings like this are on the rise. Drug-related shootings, not the kind of thing you expect in a quiet town like Breda. But in fact, over the last year, there have been over a dozen such killings in this part of Holland. It's not like Colombia, it's nowhere near as bad as Mexico, but it does have local Dutch politicians very worried. Breda's mayor is campaigning for a change to the law to regulate production as well as consumption. The Netherlands may not be a narco state yet, he says, but drug money is beginning to exert political influence.
In the city just something east from Breda, a city called Tilburg, there was an investigation that yearly the people were earning 600 million euros per year in the cannabis industry. And that's more or less the same amount, same budget as the local government by itself has.
More and more vulnerable young people are being drawn in by the lure of easy cash, and short prison sentences aren't much of a deterrent.
The youth is laughing about the punishment they get now from drugs-related crime. And then it's the money they earn with it, it's more than the punishment it's
worth doing the time.
Yeah, it's worth doing the time. The time is so short, so they think tomorrow I have 10,000 euro and I have a party again.
Most people we spoke to say the narco-state comparison is exaggerated. There's no appetite to shut down legal drug use in the Netherlands, but they know the current system isn't working. To combat the criminals, a number of local pilot projects legalizing production are being discussed. In Breda, they're convinced this is the solution, and they hope their town will be chosen. Simon McGregor Wood for the Newsmakers in the Netherlands.
Well, joining me now from The Hague is Daan van der Gouw. He's a sociologist and drug researcher at the Trimbos Institute. From Maastricht University, we have criminal law professor Hans Nielen. And in Washington, D.C. is Mike Vigil, the former chief of international operations at the Drug Enforcement Administration, or DEA. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Daan, let me begin with you. Do you find it absolutely crazy when people suggest, or even the police union suggests, that your country is becoming a, quote, narco state?
Yes, and we don't like the term narco-state because there's no scientifically sound definition of this, and so it's just a bit of, sensation-seeking term. We believe that we need to address the issue as it is, to mention the exact wording of the things, and obviously some things have to improve in the Netherlands, but I also have to say that we can still be very proud of the results of 40 years of Dutch drug policy so far.
But given that you have the police union saying that the Netherlands fulfills many characteristics of a narco state, and people feel that the tolerance for marijuana has opened Pandora's box, are you worried, Daan?
We are not worried. However, we know that the use of some drugs in our country has increased over the years, but for others it decreased, for instance of heroin. The big worry now is that the use of ecstasy in our country is the highest in Europe. This is a worrisome, alongside with the production of ecstasy and amphetamines in our country. These issues should be addressed in a way, but there's no need for a big panic at the moment because, as I said before, we believe that the results of our policy are still very positive and we should be proud.
So, Hans Nielen, is there a parallel criminal economy? Is there a parallel mafia society taking place right now in the Netherlands?
Well, I wouldn't call it a mafia-like society. As you address it, we cannot ignore that there is a serious organized crime problem in the Netherlands due to the fact that the logistics of the Netherlands are ideal, both for legitimate trade and illegitimate trade. So what you see is that the country and the facilities of the country are being abused, also by criminals, for drug production and drug trafficking. That's absolutely the case, especially in the southern regions.
Okay, so Mike Vigil, you've heard from the two Dutchmen on the panel. They're two experts. They're both saying, well, calling us a narco state is a bit much. The tolerance policy is still working, but yes, we have a few problems. Is that how you see it?
Well, I don't think that the Netherlands right now is a narco state. However, when you have drug trafficking to the scale of where it's at present day in the Netherlands, it's on a slippery slope. We had intelligence back in 1989 where we identified 3 international drug trafficking organizations operating in the Netherlands. By 1993, there were over 90 international drug trafficking organizations in the country. What we have to understand is that when you have drug trafficking, you know, drug trafficking is synonymous with violence, it's synonymous with corruption, and I don't think that the drug policy of the Netherlands has been working, as the 2 other gentlemen indicate, for 40 years. You know, we have a situation in the Netherlands where drug abuse by school-aged children in the early 90s skyrocketed by 350%.
Right. Okay.
And you have
Right. Let me take some of what you said, right? And if I can summarize it here, and correct me if I've got any of it wrong. But let me ask you, Hans. We're hearing from Mike that he's saying it's a slippery slope. He's saying this tolerance opens up this space. If you have this tolerance towards marijuana, tolerance towards prostitution and so forth, it opens up this space to not only harder drugs, but harder vices in society, like drug trafficking, like human trafficking, like gangs and so forth. Is that a fair argument?
Well, what you have to distinguish is between the drug consumption and the drug trafficking and the production. Due to what everybody had expected that in our country, due to the fact that we deal with it quite tolerantly, that the prevalence, the drug use would increase. It has increased, but not as spectacular, for instance, as in other countries like the United Kingdom or in Spain or Italy. The number of young people using drugs in those countries is much higher than in the Netherlands. But at the same time, and that's why I disagree a little bit with my colleague from the Trimbos Institute, Dan. I don't think we have been as successful as he suggests. Yes, maybe from the consumption side. But on the other hand, we do have a serious organized crime problem in the Netherlands due to the fact that maybe also we have ignored the fact that, well, there is a lot of demand and there has to be some supply. And the Dutch have always been traders. We are clever in that respect. So there has been an organized crime problem flourishing. We cannot deny that.
Okay, so Dan, do you agree that there is a serious organized crime problem that's bubbling at the moment?
This is not my key expertise, but you know, listening to the radio and reading all this stuff, yes, there is a serious organized crime problem attached to the production of synthetic drugs like ecstasy and amphetamine in the country. However, you know, it's a question of demand and supply. As long as there is supply, as long as there is demand, the supply will follow anyway. So whether it's in the country, in our country where it's being produced, or another country, we feel, you know, we would look at this issue from a health perspective, and we feel that the most attention should be addressed to the reduction of the demand to make people less willing to use drugs. Of course, you have to do this drug policy, this drug supply control as well, because it's part of our drug policy, and you have to step it up maybe a little bit. But don't expect that when you get rid of a number of laboratories in the Netherlands, that the consumption will go down. No way. This history has proven this. So you have to look also at alternatives.
Right. Hans, when I read the summary of the Dutch Police Union's report, it seemed to be a bit of a cry for help. And I wonder if the problem is, rather than the whole system, if the problem is rather that perhaps the Dutch police are just under-resourced, understaffed, and they're crying out for more resources. Might that be it?
Yeah, that's part of the problem, indeed, and especially in the southern region, because there's also, due to the geographic situation in the Netherlands, I already emphasized, well, the logistics and the facilities that we have, and especially in the border region, so close to Belgium, to Germany, to France. So for many people, it's very interesting to come to the Netherlands to buy their merchandise. And as again, the Dutch, they are known traders. They found out, hey, it's a very profitable thing to do, to produce it yourself. So we have good quality of marijuana, and everybody knows how to find it. So partly it's being consumed in the coffee shops in the Netherlands itself, but it has become a large product for export as well. So it has become quite huge in Europe, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading that Rotterdam has become an ecstasy and coke hub for export to the rest of Europe. Mike, might the root of the problem, rather than throwing out 40 years of policy and throwing out the baby with the bathwater, might the root of the problem be that the Dutch authorities are not giving the cops the resources they need, no more, no less?
Well, one of the things is that the Dutch police are outmanned and outgunned. And the resources that they currently have only allow them to investigate maybe about 1 out of 9 international drug trafficking consortiums operating in the country. I think that they have put out a cry for help, and they need those resources. They need those resources to be able to make the Netherlands a safe place. It deserves to be a safe place, and the citizens of that country deserve to be secure in their own country.
Yeah, so Mike, what would you suggest they do? Do you want a similar approach to the one you have in the United States, to what the DEA does in the United States? You want all drugs criminalized?
I am a proponent of, being against all drugs. I don't believe that any drug should be legalized, to include marijuana, especially the fact that marijuana has been genetically engineered. It now has a THC level of about 30, so it's not a safe drug. But I think that the Dutch need to look at getting rid of a lot of the organized crime that currently is afflicting that country, and it is eroding, in many instances, the rule of law, because it's estimated that about 3.5 million crimes go unreported because the population knows that the police cannot investigate the crime, so they don't bother reporting it, and that is detrimental to the security of the Netherlands.
Okay, so let me get two responses to two different parts of that answer. Let me start with Hans. Is the rule of law being eroded in your country?
Well, I have the feeling we have to be careful in that respect. But on the other hand, I think we are, we know how to deal with it to a certain extent. We need more resources, especially the police. But let me also emphasize that fighting and containing this is not only a sole responsibility of the police and the judicial authorities. What we see nowadays is a more integrated approach where also mayor and aldermen are involved, so it's also the administrative authorities. We've learned quite a lot from how to deal with this. So I wouldn't say, I'm not that pessimistic as Mike is, absolutely not.
Right, okay, so Daan van der Gaal, we heard the advice coming from Washington. You need to criminalize even things like marijuana if you want to sort this out. You're a sociologist, you understand your society better than any of us here on the panel, I'd imagine. Is that ever likely to happen in the Netherlands?
I don't think so, and I even don't hope so that it will be this will be the case. We know that banning drugs in itself has not led anywhere in the world to a decrease in its use. So you have to do more about that. Simply banning drugs is a loose gesture. What we believe is that you should inform and educate those who are using drugs and to inform them that maybe it's a better way not to do that. But in the end, it's the choice of the person themselves, whatever they do with their lives. And our task is to make the country as safe as possible by giving them and everyone else proper information about the use of drugs, and obviously focusing on the reduction of demand, but simply forbidding drugs is not an option. The war on drugs in that respect has completely failed. Countries with a very restrictive policy have usually the highest numbers of drug users.
Okay, Mike Vigil, reform and educate, don't wage a war on drugs. This is a different worldview to, I believe, what you believe. Tell me why you disagree with that.
Well, I disagree with that concept, simply because when you allow drugs or you legalize drugs or you have a policy of tolerance, what you're doing is you're opening up the doors for a large addiction population. In the Netherlands, you have about 2.5 million users of cannabis, about 260,000 users of ecstasy, and about 160,000 users of cocaine. So when that happens, you have serious health problems. And at the same time, because of these health problems, you have work-related issues because their motor skills are not up to par. So you have injuries in the workplace, and this drives up healthcare costs. It drives up so many things. And that is a problem for countries who have legalized drugs.
Right. Hans Nillen, I want to ask you a political question as we end here, Hans, because looking at some of the reports with regards to some of the gangs, a lot of the gangs in the south are Moroccan-dominated gangs, for example. I want to ask you if there's a possibility that the presence of these gangs and the prevalence of these gangs might fuel far-right tendencies in the Netherlands and might cause political problems as well on the ground. Is there a political dynamic to this?
Well, if you look at the groups involved, the criminal networking, it's far more, well, ethnic diverse, I would say. Some people are referring nowadays to a Moroccan war in the Netherlands. I think that's overstated as well. What you see, of course, there's an influence of both people who were raised and born in the Netherlands, people with a Turkish or Moroccan background. We see all kinds of ethnic groups who know that it's a very profitable business. And of course, we have to be, in that respect, we have to be alert, we have to be cautious in that respect. But I don't see, there is no such a thing, and many people, that's a myth in relation to organized crime, that some people are in control, that's a very hierarchically organized. It's very, I would say it's fission and fusion. You see groups coming up, you see disappearing, so you see different forms of cooperation. But it's not as it's one group is actually controlling it. So we're very much on top of that.
Okay, so gentlemen, it's been really interesting getting a deep dive on the situation in the Netherlands. It's quite clear that we're not going to see Narcos Season 5 coming from Holland, but there is a bit of a problem, and I'm intrigued to see how it plays out and what authorities are trying to do. For the moment, I have to thank all of you because I have to move on. Daan van der Gouw, Hans Nillen, and Mike Vigil, thanks for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
I realized that this was not a robbery or a crime of any sort, but this was a case of abduction because I am a journalist. I have covered such cases. I've talked to such people who have done this, who have gone through this.
Earlier this year, journalist Taha Siddiqui narrowly escaped an alleged abduction by a group of armed men. The Human Rights Commission of Pakistan says cases like his are not uncommon. The organization says there's been a spike in enforced disappearances and that most of the 860 missing persons cases have been dropped. The group criticizes prosecutors' lack of authority and has blasted the government for not protecting human rights. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Islamabad by Amina Masood Janjua. She's the chairwoman of the group Defense of Human Rights Pakistan, which she began after her husband went missing nearly 13 years ago. Amina, really good to have you on the Newsmakers. If we can begin with you telling us what happened to your husband, Masood, in 2005.
Yeah, thank you very much. My husband is a businessman. He's a travel agent. He's a IT college runner. So he and his friend, they were going to Peshawar on 30th July 2005. And both his friend, Masood's friends, and they left after breakfast. So their seats were booked in the Daewoo bus, and they had to travel from Rawalpindi to Peshawar. But unfortunately, they never reached Peshawar. And after that day, I have never heard of him, never heard his voice, never seen his face. Later on, we came to know that that was a routine during those days. And a lot of educated and honorable citizens of Pakistan were being picked up like that.
Was there any evidence provided at all that he might have done something wrong?
No, never. Because in the beginning, of course, the hell was fallen on me and my small 3 children. So I could not get myself up. But after months and months of trying, then I picked up myself and I started to struggle for my husband. And I also went to the Supreme Court where the Chief Justice Khalifa Haftar took so much notice of his abduction. But never I was given any information about him or any allegation that he has done this. Whenever I came across many intelligence officers or army officers, because my father-in-law was a colonel, retired, so they always said that we don't want him, we are not interested in Masood, why would we ever pick him? So that was all they were all the time telling me.
Was it encouraging at least that a lot of your activism for him and others who suffered a similar fate along with their families, was it encouraging that it helped lead to the formation of that Commission of Inquiry on Enforced Disappearances? Was it a step in the right direction for you?
Yeah, actually we have on self-help basis, when I came in contact with many aggrieved families, and I found that their grief was just like mine. So I founded a group of aggrieved families, and that was called Defense of Human Rights. So up till now we have 2,500 cases. And the success rate is that we have 950 people who have been traced out of these 2,500. And not all have been able to reach home, but at least there are around 300 who have reached home and nearly 55 who have been killed in custody. So the struggle is going on, but the government's commission is actually of course, government was forced to make a commission because they wanted to keep us out of the Supreme Court. So that was not a good choice to make because we always wanted our cases to be heard by the superior courts.
Do you think that they have Masood right now? Do you think that they're holding him somewhere?
Yeah, of course, because over the passage of all these years, there were a lot of detainees who were released, and some of them also came and they met me and they told me about my husband. At least 5 such detainees have come to me and they have given me this good news. Not all have given their testimonies in written form, but one Dr. Imran Munir has given a written testimony to the Supreme Court, and that was 10 pages long. Actually, when he himself was incarcerated, he gave the whole story, and in that story, he told his lawyer that one of the detainees I met was a businessman of Rawalpindi, and his name was Masood Janjua. So I just believe 100% that Masood is with some secret agency of Pakistan, and he's still alive because my heart says so.
A couple of weeks ago, we had a program here on the PTM, the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, and top of the agenda as these protesters and leaders have been calling for the government to act. Top of their agenda is to do something about missing people, to do something about these enforced disappearances. Tell me, I noticed that you support the movement, you're involved with the movement. Tell me why you think this is the best way forward at this moment in time as part of the PTM to try and get justice.
Yeah. Because I have been struggling on the road since last 13 years. And there were a lot of people who were with me on streets, and we also held in 2012, we had a 3 months long camp in front of the Parliament House. But now my resources have been drained. I cannot bring so many people on the streets. They need resources, they need, of course, motivation. And the families of the disappeared have become so dismotivated, they just don't want to do anything anymore. They have lost every hope, and I still try to make them come to the streets, come up and give them hope, because nothing happens overnight. So PTM is, of course, a good organization, and no political leader is giving the value to this issue. The elections are so near, but have you seen the agendas of all these political parties? It's not in the agenda of any political party. So if there's a grassroots level organization which are themselves victims, and they are speaking about, and they have kept it in their agenda to recover all the disappeared, I think I should support them, because there is not a single person in the whole Pakistan who is saying this so boldly, that they want to get their citizens released.
Very finally, if there's any member of government or even from the opposition who, as you mentioned, undoubtedly are looking to come to power in the next election, if they're watching this program, Amina, tell me, what's your message to them?
My message to them is that this is the issue which is giving dishonor to the whole nation, and the Pakistan's respect is at stake. If they can't do it for my sake, for my family and my husband, they should do it for the sake of their own country. And they will have to watch this scar that Pakistanis are disappearing their own citizens. They are selling their own citizens. Even one of the Pervez Musharraf, who was a general, he sold 4,000 people to America. Just imagine. So this is a very big scar on our country, and it has to be washed. These people have to come back, and this kind of phenomena should never take place.
Amina Masood Janjua, I thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us here on the Newsmakers.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The resolution that kicked off this whole situation is being revoked, cancelled, put aside.
And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, Zimbabwe fires 16,000 nurses after they go on strike. Is the government sending the message that dissent won't be tolerated? Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.